At Maplewood High, a school in the heart of a wealthy suburban neighborhood, the halls were filled with the hum of adolescent energy. Students walked with purpose, dressed in expensive clothes, carrying the weight of privilege on their shoulders. The school had a reputation for excellence in academics and extracurriculars, a place where the children of influential families thrived. But beneath this polished exterior, something darker festered. Prejudice simmered quietly in the hearts of many, unspoken yet ever present. For years, Ruth Williams, the school's janitor, had quietly worked in the shadows. Her hands, calloused from decades of scrubbing, sweeping, and cleaning, bore the marks of a life spent in hard labor. She was an older black woman, with graying hair that framed her tired face. To most of the students and teachers at Maplewood High, Ruth was nothing more than the janitor. She existed as part of the background, invisible and insignificant, her presence barely acknowledged beyond the quick glance of a student passing by or the occasional casual greeting from a staff member. Ruth had worked at the school for almost 20 years. She arrived before dawn to start her shift, sweeping the long hallways, scrubbing classrooms, and cleaning every corner of the school. Her job was simple, her duties clear, but it didn't shield her from the prejudice that ran deep within the walls of the institution. Despite her diligence and dedication, Ruth was frequently met with indifference. Her race and job marked her as an outsider in the eyes of the students, who often passed her with sneers or indifference. Some even made cruel jokes about her, assuming she didn't have the intellect to understand anything beyond mopping floors. Teachers, though not openly hostile, looked at her with suspicion. They didn't offer her the courtesy of a kind word or acknowledgement beyond what was necessary. Ruth had long accepted this harsh reality. She endured the mocking stares and the whispered comments, resigning herself to the role that society had assigned to her. But Ruth had once been a bright young student, full of ambition and dreams of a different life. In her youth, she had been an outstanding student, particularly in mathematics. She had been one of the few black students at a prestigious college, her sharp mind shining brightly among her peers. But the weight of prejudice and the cruel realities of society had forced her to abandon her dreams. Ruth's father had suffered a work-related injury that left her family in financial ruin, and the burden of survival had forced her to make the painful decision to give up her academic aspirations. Ruth's heart had broken that day she left college. She stood at the gates of the university, tears streaming down her face, as she silently promised herself that one day she would return to her passion. But that day never came. Life's demands were too great, and Ruth settled into a life of hard work, taking manual labor jobs just to survive. Her intellect, once a source of pride, had been buried deep within her, hidden from the world like a secret. And for the next 3 decades, Ruth endured. She lived in silence, hiding her brilliance from the world, blending into the background like the invisible figure society expected her to be. She had long ago learned to ignore the sneers and judgment, to accept that her worth was defined by her job and her skin color, not by her intellect or potential. But Ruth did not know that life, in all its unpredictability, was about to force her into the spotlight in a way she could never have imagined. That day would come during a routine shift at Maplewood High, when the cruelty and prejudice she had endured for so long would be met with an unexpected response, one that would change everything. It was just another morning. Ruth arrived at the school before sunrise, as usual, and started her rounds, sweeping the hallways, wiping down desks, and mopping the floors. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was work she took pride in. She moved quickly and quietly, determined not to disturb the flow of the school day. The classrooms were empty, the silence only broken by the faint sound of her mop scraping against the tile floors. When Ruth entered Mr. Thomas Baker's advanced mathematics class, she did so as she always did. Quietly, she had no intention of interrupting the lesson. She simply wanted to wipe the chalk dust from the floor, clean up after the students, and leave as quickly as possible. But Mr. Baker, a well-known figure at Maplewood, had other plans. Mr. Baker was a math genius, a highly respected teacher who had built a reputation for his sharp intellect and his arrogance. His students looked up to him, and he had developed a smug sense of superiority, often reminding everyone that no one in the school could match his brilliance. He prided himself on his ability to solve complex mathematical problems that others couldn't even begin to comprehend. But his pride didn't stop there. Baker's attitude toward people of color was cold and dismissive. He didn't say anything overtly racist, but his actions spoke louder than words. That morning, as Ruth bent down to pick up a crumpled piece of paper near his desk, Mr. Baker smirked. A malicious thought crossed his mind, and he saw an opportunity to assert his superiority. "Well, Mrs. Williams," Mr. Baker called out loud enough for the class to hear, his voice laced with mockery. "I'm sure you've been listening to my lessons for a while now. Why don't you come up here and show us your secret math skills?" The class, already filled with the usual arrogance and entitlement, erupted into laughter. Ruth's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. She had worked for years at Maplewood, and never had she been so openly humiliated. The students, mostly white and privileged, turned their attention to her, their laughter like a cruel wave crashing over her. Ruth could feel their eyes on her, judging her, mocking her not just for her job, but for her skin color and age. Some students whispered among themselves, their voices loud enough for Ruth to hear. "She probably doesn't even know what that problem is." The mockery was thick, and Ruth's hands trembled. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart aching with the weight of their ridicule. The room felt smaller, and she could almost hear the painful thudding of her heart in her chest. But all she saw was amusement. His eyes gleamed with malice, enjoying the discomfort he had caused her. "Mrs. Williams," he continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But who knows? Come up here and show us." The class laughed harder, the sound like knives in Ruth's ears. But in that moment, something inside her snapped. She couldn't take it anymore. She had been silent for too long, humiliated for too many years. This time, she wouldn't bow her head. Ruth stood tall, her hands gripping the crumpled paper tightly, and for the first time in decades, she took a deep breath and walked toward the board. The murmurs in the classroom grew louder, and the tension in the air thickened. But Ruth's resolve was firm. She was no longer the quiet janitor. She was going to prove them all wrong. As Ruth approached the board, the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The mocking laughter and whispers slowly faded, and for the first time in years, Ruth felt the eyes of the room upon her. Not with contempt, but with curiosity. It was an odd feeling, one she had not experienced in a long time. She had always been invisible, a background figure that no one truly saw or cared about. But now, for the first time in years, they were all watching her, waiting for her to fail. Her steps were measured as she walked to the blackboard, her mind momentarily filled with memories of her younger self. The student who had once dreamed of becoming a mathematician, the chalk in her hand felt unfamiliar, yet it brought her a sense of comfort, like reconnecting with a part of her long buried under the weight of prejudice and societal expectations. Ruth could feel the burning stares of the students, their expectations clear. They believed she would fail, that she would stumble and embarrass herself. They didn't know her. They didn't know the years of study she had put in before life had forced her to give up on her dreams. They didn't know that she had once been one of the brightest students in the mathematics department at Columbia University. The problem on the board was a challenging one. A complex calculus problem that had already stumped Mr. Baker's brightest students. Ruth's heart raced as she looked at the symbols, the equations. But as soon as her fingers gripped the chalk, she had done this before. Many years ago, her mind clicked into place as it always did when faced with a challenge. It was like riding a bicycle. Once you knew how to do it, it never left you.